You are on the cutting edge with Dr. Lee Pierson, Dr. Robert Stubblefield, and Dr. Ray Shelton and Steve Richins. And this is where we refuel our cognition by key concepts, big key concepts on this show. And how we do that is by activating more knowledge. And with that, we will continue part 4 of Adventures in the Anteroom of Epistemology by Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Dr. Leonard Peikoff. And we're going to be talking about volition today. And Bob may show up in a little bit. So that's that. And I'll hand it over to Lee.
Okay, Steve, thanks. Now, last time we had gotten to, I believe, here, page 55 in OPAR. We just started, well, we went through a few things about the nature of volition, but we have finally gotten to a really important key concept, which is focus. It's a hard concept, by the way, for me at least, to get into focus. So we need to talk about it. On page 55, by the way, we have Ayn Rand's summarizing formula for free will, that to think or not to think. And then at the bottom of page, I think that's 54. It's a little hard to tell on the Kindle version that I'm using here. But anyway, it says the primary choice, according to Objectivism, the one that makes conceptual activity possible, is the choice to focus one's consciousness. Okay, so what does that mean? Dr. Peikoff goes on to say, let me introduce the concept. This is, again, page 55. Let me introduce the concept of focus with a visual analogy. A man cannot do much with his faculty of vision until his eyes are in focus. Otherwise, his eyesight gives him only a blur or haze, a kind of visual fog, in which he can discriminate relatively little. Although the power of visual focus is not possessed by newborn infants, they acquire it very early and soon automatize its use. As adults, therefore, our eyes are automatically focused. It takes a special effort for us to unfocus them and dissolve the world into a blur. Well, I have a little problem here with this analogy. I mean, the analogy is right. But in fact, when you're looking at things visually, only a small bit at any moment is in focus at any particular time. There is no such thing as a generic focus for the world and vision. You can just all of a sudden, you focus your eyes and the world comes into focus. No. To make this a little more clear, what I have in mind here, I'd like to jump over to page 58. We'll come back, but I want to go over to 58 because Dr. Peikoff expands on the analogy there usefully. This is a paragraph that starts, focus is page 58, that starts, focus is not the same as thinking. It need not involve problem solving or the drawing of new conclusions. Okay, that's fine, I think. It's the readiness to think, and as such the precondition of thinking, he says. All right, now here's the analogy. Again, a visual analogy may be helpful. Just as one must first focus his eyes, and then, if he chooses, he can turn his gaze to a cognitive task, such as observing methodically the items on a table nearby, so he must first focus his mind, and then, if he chooses, he can direct that focus to the performance of a conceptual level task. Okay, now, and by the way you take charge, you exert this focus is by the mental effort of attention. You make a mental effort. That's very important to realize that mental effort is the way that we experience the basic act of free will. But okay, let me go back to the analogy with perception. which I think there is a valid analogy with perception, but this is not quite it. When you direct your gaze, your visual gaze to something, and focus your eyes, which is a pretty automatic. The process of focusing is pretty automatic. What happens is you focus at a particular distance on a particular object. There is no generic visual focus. The optics don't work that way. You have to focus at a particular distance, and the lens is altered just enough to focus at that particular distance, and you look at a particular object when you do so, and your eyes converge on it, and those things are coordinated, convergence and focus. So you look at something in particular, and the rest of the world actually consists of things that are not quite in focus, and there are double images out there. It's a whole bunch of double images in your periphery, but where you focus, you have your eyes converge on it, and your focus focuses for that distance to be sharp at that distance. So there is no such thing as a generic visual focus. I believe the same thing is true conceptually. Yeah, I think the analogy is correct. The analogy works. Maybe more than an analogy, it's the way the mind works, as that you focus at a particular distance, and in the case of conceptual focus or in the thought process, you focus on some particular object of thought. When you exert mental effort paying attention to something. Consciousness is always consciousness of something. There is no generic kind of generalized consciousness of the whole world all at once. You can't, at least I can't do that. If any of you out there can, please let me know how you do it, because I'd like to be able to do that. But of course, it's not in the cards. You focus on a particular object. So I don't think, and I don't think myself, I don't believe that there are two separable steps. The steps that are often called a primary choice and a secondary choice of first focusing and then focusing on something. I think those two things go together, that there is an act of exerting mental effort, and that act is directed on a particular content. Now, you can conceptually separate the act of exerting mental effort, that basic act, and you can separate that from the direction that your attention goes conceptually. And conceptually, it's something like a similar distinction that is made in mathematics and science of how a vector works. But let me put that off. I want to talk about that, the idea of volition as a vector, a little bit later. For now, let me just say that I think it's a single act rather than two acts. And uh, it's not an act of generic focusing. There is no switch you can flick. I don't have one anyway. And of course, you have to verify this yourself by your own introspection. But I don't have a switch that turns on generic focus. So when Dr. Peikoff goes on in the next paragraph, he says, to change the analogy, so he's now changing from vision to something else. To change the analogy, the choice to focus, Miss Rand used to observe, is like throwing a switch. It may be compared to starting a car's motor by turning on the ignition. And then he says, whether and where one drives are later issues. Now, I can see the idea of turning on the ignition as being something like exerting effort, but it's not really like the way a car works, where you can indeed turn on a car and rev its engine on nothing while moving nowhere. I don't think the mind works that way. You cannot rev your mind up just going zzz, and it doesn't have an object. In other words, I don't think whether and where one drives, metaphorically speaking, are later issues. They are immediate issues. You will immediately be focusing on something in particular. So this throwing, he goes on and says, this throwing of the switch consists of the exertion of one's mental capacity. That's good. The exertion is work and experienced as such, not pain, but work in the sense of basic mental effort. Now, that's a really important point. Again, introspectively, the feeling of effort is the sign of volitional, the signal, the indicator of that volitional activity is going on, volitional that you are exerting volition when you do that. Okay, so what else do I have to say about that point? I guess that's good enough for the moment, but again, the idea is when you exert the mental effort of attention, the basic act of volition, when you exert that, it's always in some direction. Now, that what that direction is going to be is also it's subject to other kinds of causation, to antecedent causation. The act of exerting mental effort itself is not subject to antecedent causation, but the direction that it goes is, and I think we'll discuss that further later. All right, so I jumped ahead to page 58 is where that is. Let's go back to where we were, page 55, where I'd gone ahead because he developed the analogy with vision. He developed it more in that later section. So let's see. On page back to page 55, he says a similar going on from the paragraph I read before that started, let me introduce the concept of focus. Let me go on to the next paragraph. A similar concept applies to the mind. This is similar again to vision. In regard to thought, as to vision, the same alternative exists: clear awareness or a state of blur, haze, fog in which relatively little can be discriminated. Well, again, that's right if you realize that your clear awareness has a particular object. It's not that you can just turn on the whole world. I mean, I've heard people say that, I got up in the morning, I went to take a shower, I chose to focus, and everything became clear. And I just don't think that's good introspection. Or they have a different kind of mentality. Introspection is tricky in the sense that we all have our own introspections, and we just have to try to compare them best we can with each other. And if there's a disagreement, it may be a disagreement in introspection can indicate poor introspection on someone's part, but it may also indicate differences between people. And it's a little hard sometimes to tell between those things. So discussing introspection is difficult. But in any case, I don't believe in this idea of generic focus that suddenly is turned on by the flicking of a switch. How about you, Bob?
Yes and no.
Okay. Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, the yes part is that it comes on, and also that whatever it comes on is what is in the current field. So, you got no choice in that. Your fundamental choice is to exert the effort, but what comes into view happens to be what is in the field at the time. And then you can exercise your secondary choices of directing it to other things. So you get up in the morning and the floor comes into view, and you start to stumble, and so you now shift your view over to the door jamb so you can grab hold of it and not stumble.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, you are agreeing uh, with what I'm saying because when you say you wake up in the morning and the floor comes into view, well, there's something comes into view pretty
Yeah.
much automatically, and then you can choose to direct it somewhere else. Now that what you're calling the secondary choice there is under the control of not only it's partly your free will, but it's partly your values, your knowledge, your history of training, and
Yeah,
many factors go into that.
your
Um,
current context.
but uh, it's still directed towards something in particular. Always, I would say. It's always your attention,
Yeah.
either perceptually or conceptually, is directed to some particular object, and that's it's not a sequence. It's not a sequence of first putting yourself into gear, as it were, or various metaphors of turning on the ignition, taking the reins. There's some other metaphors people use that have been used for ages for these things, but
the dimmer switch.
Yeah, the switch.
Dims, but it's the dimmer, not just the switch, but
Well,
the dimmer.
or I would say it's a rheostat, more of a rheostat than a than an on-off switch. But also, it's not generic in nature. It's not that you can put on some, you can do something that puts you into some state of generalized focus. You're always focusing on something. Now, maybe you wake up once in a while. I don't know. You have to consult your own introspection here, but maybe you wake up once in a while and say to yourself, "I'm going to be in focus today. I'm going to be oriented to reality today." And I think you can do that. How often do I do that? Well, I got to tell you, almost never. What I do is I wake up in the morning and I get about my business. I do what I'm doing. I'm doing my stuff. And that happens to involve careful cognition, highly directed, my attention is directed and so forth. I am in focus in any meaningful sense of the word, but it's not like I have to choose to do that in some, how should I say, unfocused way, some generic way first, and then I start doing my stuff. No, I get up in the morning and I start doing my stuff. I attend to this, I attend to that, whatever it is I need to attend to. Those they're not. I don't introspect these separable as these things as separable choices. And I think Bob was agreeing with me on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
No, I believe it. I mean, it makes sense. Okay, so let's go ahead here. He said, Dr. Peikoff says, focus in the conceptual realm names a quality of purposeful alertness in a man's mental state. I think that's all right, I guess. It's the state of a goal-directed mind committed to attaining the full awareness of reality. The key word there, a key concept, which we always are looking for, I think, is committed. There is, let's see whether this turns out to be consistent. The idea of being just committed as opposed to being in a state. The word focus itself, because of the visual analogy, suggests a state of clarity in itself, that in itself is a state of clarity. But here, what Dr. Peikoff is talking about is being committed to achieving that state of clarity. And I'm not sure that distinction is always maintained in the objectivist literature between being committed to a state of clarity and actually achieving one. And the word focus somewhat contributes to that possible conflation. Anyway, it's something to look out for, I would say, anyway. Let's go ahead if we can here. Now let's talk about on page 56. Dr. Peikoff talks about what's full awareness, being committed to full awareness. It obviously doesn't mean being committed to awareness of everything that exists out there in existence, in reality, which is impossible. No human being anyway can do that. You'd have to be God if there were such a creature. Well, I guess God's not a creature, is he? But anyway, if there were a God, maybe you could have such omniscience. But we humans don't work that way. So he says, Dr. Peikoff says, full awareness does not mean omniscience. It means the awareness attainable by a man who seeks to understand some object. Good, that's very good. See, by using to the full the evidence, the past knowledge, and the cognitive skills available to him at that time. I like that formulation. And then you see it's directed to a particular object there. All right, I'm going to pass by the drunk. Okay, going on. I'm going to just, we're just making some comments here, and you guys can jump in anytime you feel like it with this. But if you go over to 58, near the top, Dr. Peikoff says, the state of being in focus, in full focus, means the decision to use one's intelligence fully. Again, I like that, but um, it's got to again have to, it really, you have to keep in mind that it's on a particular object, and so it really there's a certain tension here at another point, which oh, it's the next paragraph. He Dr. Peikoff tells us that when you're walking down the street, you don't have to be solving problems. You don't have to be, so you're not using, it's not that you're using your intelligence fully all the time. That is not what we're talking about. So it's a little misleading to say the decision to use one's intelligence fully. I would say it's more like the decision to know what you're doing when you're doing it. To be in awareness of what your mind is doing and being aware that that's the appropriate thing to be doing at that time. Bob wants to jump in here.
Well, it's using your intelligence fully in the context that it should be used. That is, full intelligence in this context is solving problems, and full intelligence in the other context is not tripping over your feet.
I guess you could say that. I find that a peculiar usage. I mean, it was strange, very strange to say, I'm using my full intelligence. Well, I'm in the sense, as you say, in a sense, in the sense that I know what my mind is doing. I can be sitting in a chair resting, entirely just resting, not even walking down the street, watching mindless television. And I find that that would be a peculiar usage of the term using my intelligence, my full intelligence. I don't find that. I just think that's an odd, and it's a sort of idiosyncratic and somewhat forced usage to use it that way. But I guess you can. Well, I suppose you can.
Yeah.
Full awareness does not require any new conceptualization. Oh, in situations where one's knowledge is already adequate. I mean, you have to think about adequate for what? I guess for whatever purposes you've chosen at that time, whatever your purposes are at that time. Full awareness does not require any new conceptualization. Is it attainable by a simple directing of attention? Well, here I have to add a little something to this. We know more than we use. We have knowledge that we don't automatically use all the time. This is something I think about a lot because it's a lot of the training that I do with students is training them to use more of their knowledge than they use automatically. So when I ask them,
that's a reference to my, and I know you know this. It's Michael Polanyi.
oh, Michael Polanyi, yeah,
Yeah, Polanyi, the
yeah,
implicit,
Polanyi's
the guy who
where he says we know more. Well, his formula is it's a little different issue. He says we know more than we can say. It's a parallel to Polanyi, but Polanyi's point is that there is implicit knowledge that we are using, and the example that he uses, as I remember, one of them was riding a bicycle.
Yeah.
And you know how to ride a bicycle, but if somebody asks you, how do you do that? Well, you know, you're on the bike and you can go down the street and you don't fall down. How do you keep from falling down? Well, people do not usually give the correct description of how that works. And see, I've got to recollect for myself. The correct description is that you turn, if you're starting to fall, you turn in the direction of your fall. And that's how you keep from falling. And that sounds counterintuitive to most people. They don't say that, but that is in fact what you do. So that's an example of there's some procedural knowledge that we have unverbalized that's hard to verbalize. So it's a somewhat different point, Steve.
Okay.
A somewhat different point. But there's a parallel that we have. We know more than we use. We have more knowledge than we automatically use, and of course, some of the stuff that Steve and I do to train students involves making more use of the knowledge that we have than we do automatically. That requires a whole process of introspection and thinking. So anyway, I'm just saying there's something a little going on here, a little more than just a the simple directing of attention, the knowledge that you have, all it takes to get all your knowledge is simple directing of attention. It's not always that simple. I'm thinking whether we should give an example of that here. I mean, I have many. My favorite example is the old question: should a man be allowed to marry his widowed sister? Ray, what do you think? Should a man in California, is it legal for a man to marry his widowed sister?
No.
I'll have to speak to my lawyer about that.
Okay. Well, when I first saw this question, my reaction was it was mercifully brief, but my reaction was, why not? But I did have an inkling, a feeling about a thought, and one of the things that is very important in being focused is paying attention to inklings, feelings about thoughts as they come up, because they're signals. An inkling is a feeling, it's a signal from your subconscious telling you, I need you to do some work here. I need you to do some volitional thinking about something in particular. And so I get an inkling. I got an inkling, and I know what that means. I mean, something's wrong somewhere. It just doesn't think. I had the feeling of things don't quite hang together in that. And I identified the key concept that I need to activate knowledge about, which is widow. Because if you ask yourself, let's just say you had the same reaction I did, which not everybody does, but my reaction was, why not? Why shouldn't they? If you ask yourself, what is a widow? And you start with, when you ask yourself questions of that sort, you start with examples and definitions. And if you have a definition, you can start with a definition. But those are the two things to start with. Anyway, a widow is a woman whose husband is deceased, no longer with us. And once you get that clearly in your mind, you're likely to realize that the man, if a man were to marry his widowed sister, you're talking about a guy who's dead getting married. And maybe you can do that in Egyptian mythology or something. I don't really know, but you can't really do that in California. Not quite yet. They may pass that law sometime there
It's
soon.
on the way. It's on the way.
So anyway, that's an example of we all know what a widow is. Everybody knows what a widow is, but the fact that you know it doesn't necessarily mean that knowledge will come to your mind automatically, unbidden. Well, it's bidden a little bit, but it doesn't come to your mind automatically always when you need it. That's why we have free will. That's an important reason why we have free will. So I just wanted to add that in as a little elaboration there.
Now, Lee, speaking of feeling that things are wrong, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
How does one go about reconciling or integrating these two particular facts that Leonard is talking about? On the one hand, he's talking about levels of awareness. And on the other hand, there's this on-off switch, right? So they seem to, in my mind, clash. That if one is raising or lowering one's level of attention, one is not switching off or on anything. So
that's right.
That's
the answer.
There's that point.
That's the answer, I think.
The other is that in the early objectivist literature, as I read it, and I'll just give you a couple of quotes, and it pertains to what I briefly mentioned last time, Ayn's quote about volition begins with a syllogism. Brandon uses this sort of language. To focus one's mind is to set it to the purpose of active integration. And in Leonard's book, he says being in focus is just walking down the sidewalk, enjoying the sights. Now, that does not
Right.
strike me as integration at all, just observation. Then he also uses to focus is to initiate a process of directed cognitive integration, there's another formulation. And in the earlier objectivist literature, volition seems to be tied again and again solely to conceptualization, to think or not to think, right? And that would mean any of the various processes that are involved in thinking, from the simplest observation of similarities and differences and so forth and onward. So in my mind, what I'm thinking about is, all right, so the claim is made that only human beings have volition, right? That's the standard objectivist claim. Then we have this early claim that volition has to do with starting the cognitive, or excuse me, starting the conceptual process or processes. Now, from here, I could see why a logical deduction would be, well, animals don't have volition because they don't initiate the conceptualization process. And tied to that is human beings, we have levels of awareness, but animals, on the other hand, don't seem to have differing levels of awareness. They just seem to be on one level. So I find this quite a jumble to which I really don't have. I mean, the only resource, of course, is my own introspection. And my own introspection is that I just go about and do what I want, and I turn my attention and think when I want to think. I know people have stressed effort, but I don't experience. I don't. What happens inside my mind? It doesn't feel like effort at all. It just feels like I look, I read, I start thinking. I don't feel any extra push. I don't feel any extra, God, I got to look at this harder. So that may be the Martian in me, but it seems
Well,
quite a jumble.
there's an awful lot of things in there's a whole panoply of points there.
I was saving it up for you.
Okay, that's good. Let me go back. I can't remember all of them. I should have been taking notes, I guess. But all right, let me go back to the first thing about levels of awareness, which I don't really like that phrase. It's a little new agey for me, the notion of levels of awareness. But there is there is clearly a difference between things that come to you easily. Maybe everything in the world comes to you easily. Me, there's hard problems I really need to exert effort on. I really need to keep going. I need to push beyond what comes to my mind automatically in order to solve those. And that's you could call that a higher level of awareness. But the point the first point regarding the switch, and I don't believe in the switch. Maybe there's a rheostat, but the point made in an early objectivist newsletter article about this issue was that you don't start from zero. Your awareness doesn't start at zero. There's a certain basically automatic level of awareness. It's low, probably, usually, depending on what you've automated. But you start from there. So it's not like starting from zero, the article points out. Starting from zero is really impossible. How could you start from nothing? If you got no awareness in your mind of anything, how could you even begin a thought process? You can't. Yeah. So it's not an issue of going from flicking a switch on from nothing, turning the ignition key on and there was nothing going on. That the analogy doesn't go that far. There has to be some level that you're starting with, and you're going to what you could call a higher level. I would say you are going beyond what comes to mind automatically when you exert mental effort. You're on a particular object, you will do more thinking. There'll be more, which is basically asking yourself and answering questions. You'll be doing more of that than would have occurred otherwise. So it's not going from literal unconsciousness. That's from the article. I think that
Yeah,
description.
yeah.
Not, you don't go from literal unconsciousness to conscious. So I think that's the answer to that. That you don't actually go from zero. So in that sense, when Dr. Peikoff says focus is the precondition of thinking, I don't think it's not really a precondition. It's you're initiating a process beyond what comes to mind automatically, or you're sustaining a process
And that seems
beyond
closer
what
to
comes to mind
to
automatically.
the earlier version.
Yeah,
The way you
the
phrase
version that's
that.
in the version that's in the Objectivist newsletter. As
Right.
far as Brandon is concerned, I think the best thing that Brandon said in his article on Objectivist theory of volition was he said that volition, I can't quote it exactly at this moment, but I can give you the essence of it. You're giving yourself the command, grasp this. I remember that exact phrase, grasp this. It's always a particular object. It's not that you're saying grasp everything or just,
Right.
turn on a light bulb and everything. It's grasp this. Now it's not, I don't think he was consistent in sticking to that, but that was a good formulation in the article in the Objectivists some time ago. So now you brought up the animals. I'd like to stay away from the animals.
Well, let's
Everybody
stay
wants to
away.
talk
That's
about the
fine.
animals.
That's fine.
Objectivists always want to talk about the animals, but let me tell you,
We can leave them in the ark.
people don't, myself included, don't know much about animals. Really, we don't have that special. Even the experts on animals don't know about the mentality of animals, and all this confident talk about what animals can do and animals can't do. I think is mostly a lot of hot air. And I'm more interested. I mean, I am interested in the animals because I'm interested in evolution, and I do insist that volition is an evolved capacity. It did not uh, emerge from Zeus's forehead, or God did not implant it in Adam or something. It's an evolved capability, and evolved capabilities almost always evolve in a sequence of fairly small steps. You don't get what they call saltation in evolution. Maybe once in a while, I don't know, but generally speaking, you don't, and I don't think you do here. And I think we must be aware that there must have been antecedent forms, whether they still exist in humans or not, that the earlier species of hominins, and I think other animals, have a reduced form of volition. I think that's very likely to be true simply as a evolutionary fact. And I do think in humans, if you look at humans, we can introspect that we have a volitional capability that is not restricted to the conceptual level, to thinking. You can direct your attention. And of course, the example I like to point out here, which I've done, maybe, I don't remember if we've done it here. I can't remember now recently, but the example of the cocktail party where
Yeah.
there's 100 people speaking, and you can pay attention to one person's conversation, what one person is saying in a cacophony, but it takes effort. That takes effort, Ray. I think even you, maybe, if you're in that room with a cacophony of conversations, you can pay attention to what Steve's saying, but you have to exert the effort to do so. It
Not
doesn't
if,
happen automatically.
not if it's what
No effort
Steve
for
was
you.
saying.
Well,
um,
okay, Bob, anyway.
no,
Somebody,
what I
you have to
wanted to,
exert effort to do it. It is an
what I
effortful
was,
process, and therefore, in my view, it's a volition of a sort, much more
okay.
primitive
This
sort,
is
of
this is
course.
this is what I'm asking. Um, in the earlier, it strikes me that the concept of volition there is tied tightly, very tightly, to initiating conceptual thought,
Yeah.
and that all of this directing attention has nothing to do with volition. That
Oh
volition,
no.
wait a minute, volition in the objectivist sense, if I understand the earlier work, is not about look here, look at that, see this, see that. It's about initiating the formation of concepts or the integration of knowledge. That's that's how I read this, and you know, I could be mistaken, but I'm thinking that that may be a source of the confusion because, again, just to bring up animals, obviously they can pay attention to things. They do, if you've ever been around them. The higher ones certainly pay attention to things. So it may be that Rand is trying to circumscribe the idea of volition to just conceptual cognition and nothing else. And that all of this other stuff, paying attention or whatever, emotions and desires, has nothing to do with volition. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I was okay until you came to the end and said had nothing to do with it, because I think attention is very much, very much entailed in thinking. And the effort of attention is what drives a thought process forward, as well as it drives some perceptual activities. They're not the same. The conceptual process is self-conscious. I mean, the full volition, full conceptual volition that we have as humans, the ability to think, is a much more complete ability, or not, that's not the right word, maybe. Advanced. It's an advanced ability as compared to a primitive ability that some animal may have, or even we have when we attend to a particular thing perceptually, which I recommend thinking about that rather than thinking about animals that you don't know anything about or know enough about to know. But there is a more primitive form of, but I would call that a more primitive form of volition because they both absolutely involve attention. There is no thought process without attention. And the effort of attention is the effort that drives thinking, that keeps it going as a non-automatic process. And thinking is not automatic, or there is some automatic aspects that you when you see something, you immediately have some automatic thoughts about it. When something comes into your mind, you have some automatic thoughts. But basically, thinking is a volitional process by which you go beyond that, whatever comes to mind automatically, and you ask yourself questions and you answer those questions, and it's an effort to do so. That is, it doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't just automatically that you can solve. Okay, here's a primitive, not a primitive, but a very simple example, and is one of Harry Binswanger's favorites, I guess. But I've seen it other places. If I ask you 2 + 2. What's 2 + 2? 4 will pop into your mind automatically. No effort, no thinking. It just pops in your, because you've automated that. If I ask you, what is 127,963 plus 453,291? It's not going to pop into your head automatically, no matter how long you sit there. You can sit there from now until the end of the heat death of the universe, and it will not pop into your mind. You have to do particular work, and you have to direct your attention to that particular work. So that's a simple, I guess, but clear example of the difference between, things happening to you automatically and things that take thinking and effort, actual thinking and actual effort. So anyway, you can chew on that one if you like.
All right, I will. I'm going to have a big meal this evening.
Okay, so
could I think out loud on this a little bit?
Absolutely.
Levels of awareness. There are 2 huge levels of awareness, different. There's the conceptually aware or perceptually aware. I mean, we all grasp that. Let's focus down on just perceptual awareness. Take a newborn is perceptually aware of some things, and after a couple of years of experience, he has a different level of perceptual awareness. There are memories, experiences he's had that he has memories of that contribute to his grasping of what's going on around the world.
I don't think it's memory so much, but okay, I get your point. I don't think memory is the right word, because memory properly, when the term memory is used properly, it refers to being aware of something, with the additional awareness that you were aware of it before. And that doesn't happen very often in the perceptual context. There is an effect of past experience. There is an effect of past experience. There's what the Gibsons call perceptual learning.
Okay.
Anyway, that's maybe a side point. Go ahead. That's a side point. Go ahead.
Well, the main thing is to point out that there are different levels of awareness among different beings. Even, as I say, there's the huge one between conceptual versus perceptual. And then there's the smaller ones along the way. There are incorrect conceptual awarenesses. There are misconceptualizations.
Yeah.
So that, for example, Ayn Rand's awareness of the world, I think, was vastly different from most people because she had, to my knowledge, no misconceptualizations. Whereas most people have several misconceptualizations.
I'm not going to make a judgment about whether Ayn Rand's had no misconceptualizations, but certainly there's a difference. And
as I say, that's my own personal
right.
evaluation.
No, that's a good point, Bob. It's a good point.
So now, if volition is necessary to conceptualize, which I think Ayn Rand makes a very good case that it is, then, well, that just shows that it's an extremely important aspect of being aware of the universe, being aware of anything.
Is volition necessary for first level concepts? I would say no.
Harry also says no, for some first level concepts.
Yeah, or maybe not, but for a lot of them anyway. They just kind of pretty much there are no alternatives, and they're easy to form, and they just form.
So I guess
when you start doing abstraction from abstraction, then it becomes I would say then it becomes essential to do it by volitional mental effort.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are the two main points I want to make, is that there are levels of awareness, and that conceptualization and misconceptualization are two different forms, two different levels of awareness.
I'm okay. Would you say misconceptualization is a level of awareness or a level of non-awareness?
Yeah.
Because awareness is okay. All right. Well, so we're okay on that. I mean, awareness we would normally reserve for.
Yeah, it's like
actual cognition.
A misconceptualization is one's assumed awareness, but it happens to be wrong.
Okay. All right. That sounds right. I think what you said makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
What can we do with that? How do we apply that here?
Well, you said you know nothing at all about animals, and I said,
well I'm not just very little, very little. Yeah, but I'm talking about the non-human, the things that what people know about consciousness is pretty much by introspection. So unless you happen to be a dog, you don't really have a lot of access. I mean, there are people that study dog behavior, what dogs do. It's hard, and to infer from that what their consciousness is like, it's not so easy. And I think, I must say, I think objectivists are often too facile at drawing inferences about what's going on in the mind of an animal. It's not that easy to be sure about that. And I'm interested in it, but I don't want to try to use it as a big argumentative point. And objectivists do they want to talk about animals all the time, at least when we're talking about volition and the possibility of reduced form. I think the simplest thing to do is to see it in humans first, to realize that perceptual attention is not a completely automatic process. Of course, it has there's an automatic neurophysiology a physical basis. But guess what? There's a physical basis for concept formation and thinking too. That part of, whatever is going on in the brain, qua brain, if I may use that nice objectivist word, whatever goes on in the brain as such is a deterministic process. And whether, and that's true of bodily motions, which were important in perception as well. The things that you do with your body, which are very important in my view. A lot of those things are automatic processes, but there is a volitional aspect both to attention. Also, there's a whole volitional motor movement system. They're volitional, they're the striated muscles. There's a voluntary system that's under volitional, well, let's just say under conscious control. I mean, you can argue about what kind of volition it is, but it's not the same as conceptual volition, but there's something that's not automatic. And characterizing perception as an automatic process is a misconceptualization. It has an automatic aspect, but it's not automatic in totality. And there's a lot of argument. We've had arguments about this in various forums, but I think that's what it boils down.
You can
Sorry?
use the analogy with cars. It's not fully automatic.
Fully automatic. Well, okay. Is it a stick shift? Are we talking about? Or?
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
The stick shift of perception.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, anything else?
So Lee, do you want to take a question from?
Oh, good.
I got Ryan has a question from Existence University. He has a YouTube channel.
Okay.
And
very good. Yeah.
He says, and I'm still trying to make. So what does Lee and the panel think is the proper way to classify this mental moment I personally experience where I do have to remind myself to focus? And then.
Yeah. Okay. I got an answer to that. Generally speaking, I'm not 100% sure what's going on there, but the word focus, when it's used in everyday parlance, means to focus on something. When everyday conversation, when people use it, and the term focus is used a lot in sports and other things. When somebody tells you, "Hey, focus here," you got to focus. What they're telling you is you have to focus on this particular thing that you should be focused on. And so I think that's probably the sense when you're telling yourself you have to focus. What you're telling yourself is, "Hey, my mind's wandering or something's happening. I got to get back to my business," which is to focus on something in particular. And that usage of focus, I think, is quite legitimate, and it's the common usage that's out there in the big world. That's the way people use that term, and it's a completely valid. And I think that's what's going on in that case. But Ryan will have to decide for himself whether that's an adequate description of what he's getting at. I don't think it's this, I got to turn on my focus, my generic focus, and then I'll be able to do something. I don't think it's that. I doubt it. That's good. Anything else out there in the?
No.
No. Okay. All right. So we just talked about effort and focus and what a switch could be. There's another problem I ought to bring up at some point, so why not now, with the notion of a switch or the notion of taking the reins, which is of course another old chestnut in this field, take the reins. In the case of, I like to make management analogies sometimes. These are analogies, of course. So the manager gets behind the desk and is ready to manage. That's another one. The problem with these things, they're not. They leave out the fact that you can take the reins of the horse and ride the horse into a ditch. You can manage the company and you can manage it into ruination and lose all its value. The company could lose all its. You can. What was the other thing?
Drive it.
Well, in any case, what the problem is that you have to integrate evasion into this as well. that you can, evasion is an act of volition. It's a volitional, positive volitional act, but you're going against what you know you should be doing. You know you should be doing X to fulfill your, to advance your life, to achieve your values, to do, and you do Y purposely to avoid doing X. That's what evasion is about. But that's definitely taking the reins. It's not taking the reins, unless you include in taking the reins, which maybe you should, a full awareness, the introspective awareness of what's going on is included in that idea. If you do that, that you're fully aware, and then you do what you need to do in order to advance your life. If you have that all in one thing, but somehow the idea of getting behind the steering wheel is another one. You can get behind the steering wheel and you can drive the car into a telephone pole. So it's not, you have to have something more than that to get at a proper notion of focus. As an objectivist would mean it. But it definitely, there is a kind of focus in a sense. Whatever the right word is, when you're evading, when somebody evades. And when the formulation of to think or not to think, when you break that down, what are the alternatives? You can think, you can do nothing. I would say not think. I don't think not think is a choice. I mean, this is another thing that's been discussed recently. Bob's shaking his head. I don't know if he's agreeing or disagreeing. Not thinking is okay. So there's been some discussion of this on Harry Binswanger's list, which, by the way, is a good place for discussion in case anybody wants to discuss things. But we will also discuss them today in the Zoom coming up soon. But what are the alternatives? You can choose to think. You can choose to achieve clarity on some important issue and working on it by effort. You can evade, which is generally that's what I think that's about. See, I try to avoid evasion, so it's hard to introspect. Well, you can't really introspect an evasion anyway, really, in a way, because if you really introspected on it, you would be that runs contrary to what you're trying to do, what evaders are trying to do. But whatever it is, they have to exert a mental effort to stay away from what they should be thinking about. So that is a form of mental effort itself. And then there's just not thinking. Sometimes the word drift is applied there, and I don't see that to be a choice. It's just doing nothing. If you do nothing, you will drift. That's what happens. It seems to me. And Bob, you wanted to say something about that?
No, a different topic, but I'll wait.
Okay, different topic. So
Actually,
anyway,
the same but a different aspect. But anyway.
Okay, let's go ahead. Go ahead with that.
Well, I've been cogitating about analog between physical and mental effort. And it's certainly true that you can start from zero physical effort and exert a little effort and exert more. There are levels of effort involved physically. How about mentally? I think it's also true mentally that you may be exerting zero mental effort. I'm not referring to whether or not this is a choice. That's the other aspect. That's what you were talking about. But the fact that it is zero mental effort, and then there are things that require a little bit of mental effort, and then there's the man marrying his widow's sister, which requires a little bit more mental effort. It's true that you won't automatically believe that, or you won't automatically see that a dead man can't do anything at all.
You might. Some people do.
Some do, but most people don't. And in order to do so, they have to exert at least a little bit of effort.
Yes.
And
That effort has to be specifically directed in the right direction. It's not just trying hard. Trying hard will not get the work done. Just trying hard will not do it.
yeah,
I've seen that in students. I've seen that in students over and over again. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Yep.
All I'm trying to do here is not talk about how accurate your effort has to be, but rather the fact that there is some effort involved. There can be. There are levels of effort, more or less, both physically and mentally. That's the only point.
I think we're all in agreement with that. And I would say that when you say there's zero, you start from zero effort. Yeah, you start from zero effort, but you don't start from zero awareness. Zero effort does not equal zero awareness. There is some level of awareness, even in a child, there's some level of awareness that's automatic. You don't start from zero awareness of the world.
That's right.
Your zero effort is not set at zero awareness of the world.
And newborns have a different starting point from those with experience, and different yet from those who have conceptualized, and different yet from those who have not ever misconceptualized.
Yeah, if there are people that have never misconceptualized. There are a lot of opportunities. In my mind, the issue is not so much whether you've ever misconceptualized. The issue is, what have you done about it? If you have misconceptualized, do you self-correct? That's the issue. That's the real issue there in that respect.
Yeah, it's whether or not you're content with your misconceptualizations.
Yeah. Okay, this is a point where I'd like to start on volition as a analogically speaking or metaphorically speaking, volition as a vector, but we have reached pretty much our time. And so that will be a good place to start next time, if that's all right with you guys. We'll talk about volition as a vector, as a single choice with what you could call primary and secondary aspects to it. Maybe you could put it that way, as against first you focus and then you focus on something, which I hope we have succeeded in undermining that idea this time. So anything else you guys, Ray, you want to say something to Bob? Steve,
well,
you want to?
The only thing I would say is that this discussion, I think, points to the need for a lot of reconceptualization or a lot of rethinking about these particular issues, and why some of this material is in OPAR. In other words, did it need to be there to make the philosophic points, or did it distract? I think that's an important point in terms of making objectivism a living philosophy, that you rethink things, you you continue to ask questions and challenge the text. And I think this is one of the very good places to do that, because even in discussing all of these issues, to me, there still seem quite a jumble of no clear case, I think, has been set out in OPAR with this, at least to my reading anyway. Bless Leonard's heart. How these differing facts integrate into a whole. So I think it's a good discussion to have, and it's a good place for objectivists to spend some time thinking about it if they want to keep the philosophy alive in their soul. Because I've seen people over my lifetime who don't keep objectivism alive. They don't challenge the text. They don't challenge themselves. They don't, as Bob was saying, they don't challenge their own, ask themselves, do they have mischaracterizations? And they drift away. And in the end, they always act the same way. It's stunning. I've seen it over and over again. So what you're doing, Lee, is helping to make us all better objectivists. Wherever if we're at the 0 point, or somewhere else along the line.
All right, then. Then to be continued next time. Let me just add, though, one little thing that I'm not saying. I certainly think it's obvious that objectivism, the proper noun, is Ayn Rand's philosophy,
Of course.
and it's not a question of adding on to objectivism. But objectivism is not the same thing as philosophy, and nor is it certainly not the same thing as psychology. Those things
Yes.
are separate concepts, and those can be added to and need to be added to.
Yes.
And we will continue to try to do that next time, right?
Getting her right can be difficult.
That's true too. Yeah.
That was my point. That was my basic point.
Yeah.
Just getting her right.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think Daniel's going to put a Zoom link in the chat.
Oh yeah,
And-
we have a Zoom link where we will at least some of us. Bob, are you going to come too?
For a while, yeah.
Okay, we're all going to go off to the Zoom link for any further discussion, any issues anybody wants to bring up. We'll have a discussion.
We'll come back with part 5 and vector as a volition.
That will be a further discussion of volition as a vector, since all I did today was barely introduce the idea. Okay, excellent. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel.